Hello everyone, today's question is asking what are the differences in hoarding behaviours, sometimes seen in both narcissists and victims of narcissistic abuse? Because both can exhibit the same kind of behaviours. There could be difficulty getting rid of things, and this could lead to clutter, rooms being piled high with stuff, and in extreme cases, unsafe living spaces. But although they can look the same, the reasons behind the hoarding in both cases can be very different. Well, first of all, looking at the hoarding from the perspective of a victim of narcissistic abuse. Narcissists tend to erode and chip away at someone's autonomy and their self-confidence. Their choices, decisions, their opinions are often undermined and criticised. Reality is rewritten, and people find themselves at the mercy of a narcissistic person's moods and whims. And people can live in a constant state of chaos, strain, and uncertainty, never knowing what they'll be blamed for or attacked for next. So if someone has removed themselves from that kind of relationship, there can be a need to regain a sense of control and maybe create some sense of safety. And acquiring and keeping hold of things can be a way of building a barrier to keep painful memories and experiences at bay. Now, though others may just see chaos and piles of things, to someone who's been emotionally and psychologically abused, there can be a strange sense of security being surrounded by items. Next, narcissists isolate their victims. They mock their interests, insult their past, as they try to mold them into someone who exists solely to serve and worship them. So their sense of self is eroded a little piece at a time through constant criticism, gaslighting, and emotional blackmail. So personal items that came before the abuse, such as gifts from loved ones, old photographs, or maybe books or music, well, these can feel like a link to who they used to be. So it can be a bit like holding on to a lost identity, proof of happier times. And holding on to these things can be like an act of defiance as they try to reclaim themselves. But losing some of those things might feel like they might lose the last pieces of their true self. So the things they hoard aren't just items. They're more like an anchor to an identity, a reality that is still there somewhere. Now, another reason could be because in a narcissistic relationship, someone could find their property either being damaged or given away to others without their consent. So someone might become overly protective, trying to keep hold of the things that belong to them, afraid of losing something or maybe it being taken from them. Lastly, in a narcissistic relationship, the abuse can take many forms. They not only keep their victims in a state of emotional poverty by withholding attention and affection, but they can also withhold resources and money. They can deprive their victims of many things in many different ways to keep them in a state of dependence and constant worry. And they do this by promising things, then withdrawing just to punish them. And that kind of manipulation can rewire someone's brain for survival, so they begin holding on to things to give them a sense of safety. So hoarding can feel as if they are protecting themselves from the vulnerability of being dependent. They might begin stockpiling things, sometimes even things they don't actually need. And it's not out of greed, but rather out of fear they might be left with nothing. And as is common with trauma, the survival behaviours can remain even after they've freed themselves from that toxic environment. Now moving on to the hoarding behaviours sometimes seen in narcissistic people. Whenever a narcissist holds on to something, it's not necessarily due to some kind of emotional attachment, but rather because they see some kind of value in it, even if it's not monetary value. Even if it's not something they'll ever wear or use, it could be something they believe gives them some kind of status. And this can come from their need for admiration. Whatever it is they keep, they believe it will boost their ego. Now, another reason for the hoarding could be their sense of superiority. Their accumulation of items isn't really about need, comfort, or even nostalgia, but they're aimed at showing how affluent or important they are. They could have books they've never read, jewellery they've never worn, or expensive gadgets they've never used, unless of course they have an audience. So the things they hoard are more like trophies. They've maybe been bought because at the time they looked good and they felt good buying them, but the novelty wore off very quickly. Sometimes the novelty wears off even before they get home. Narcissists tend to act on their whims. It's what looks or feels good in the moment. And quite often the things they buy just get forgotten about, sometimes even left in their boxes. Until of course they have an audience, and they remember they just might have something which could impress. Now, when it comes to attention seeking, narcissists might leave things lying around, maybe something expensive, but they're hoping to get someone's attention, get some kind of admiration or compliment. At social gatherings, they might lift out their latest gadget, flash their new watch or new piece of jewellery, but they're quickly scanning the room to see who notices. So their accumulation of items is really just about showing off their affluence, their status, and trying to induce envy. The things they have are just a way to prop up their grandiose self-image, and they can become very frustrated and angry if someone isn't really that impressed in their new acquisition, or maybe has one themselves. Next, a narcissist might see their possessions as an extension of themselves, which is one of the reasons why they can become outraged, even aggressive, if someone suggests they maybe do a bit of decluttering. Because it's not just about clearing some space or maybe getting rid of something they don't need or use. Rather, it can feel like a direct attack on their sense of worth. Also, narcissists can be highly disagreeable. How dare you suggest something they have, something they own, or something they have chosen be of no real use, is just a waste of money, or is taking up space. And having to get rid of something might feel like they're having to admit to being flawed somehow, and that's not acceptable. Moving on, a narcissist isn't really going to care if their accumulation of things causes discomfort for others. Rooms being filled with their excessive clutter can take up a lot of space, and this reduces the space available for other people and their belongings as well. But to a narcissist, their stuff is much more important. But in some cases, they can also use their hoarding as a way to dominate and control others. They can hold others accountable if something is out of place or has maybe been damaged. If they can't find whatever it is they can find in their pile of stuff, they might accuse others of taking it. They can also use their hoard to create chaos and discomfort by making the home unbearable for other family members. Any attempt to clear up or tidy away could be met with anger, outrage, sometimes even accusations. And this can have their partners and their children in a constant state of discomfort, and in extreme cases, they might experience shame. Shame if others were to ever see the living conditions. So this means the narcissist gets to keep control over how the others live, and they stay the centre of attention. Their families have to live surrounded by the narcissist's treasure, and this can lead to isolation from others and can be a barrier to any real connection. Now, sometimes a narcissist will hoard the things that are valuable to other people, not necessarily because they have sentimental or shared value, but more as a trophy. It gives them a sense of power and control to hold on to something associated with someone else. They might even hoard information, something they think might be useful to them at some point in the future to benefit themselves. Other times, they could withhold information they know someone else could benefit from, just to give themselves a sense of control and to make things difficult for the other person. And lastly, narcissists don't just hoard things they'll never use or need. They can hoard people as well. Even if they don't particularly like someone, they might keep them around just because they need someone to ignore, someone to feel superior to. Or maybe someone who has useful skills or useful contacts, someone they can use from time to time. They keep others around not necessarily out of friendship or connection, but because they see them as useful idiots, and they can use them as flying monkeys if they have to. In workplaces or cult-like movements where narcissists dominate, well, they might keep highly skilled and talented people around, but they don't utilize them or their skills. They just like having them to be able to point out to others the kind of people they have in their orbit. But they never encourage or allow those people to do the very things they're good at, in case maybe they shine too much. So to summarise, hoarding behaviours may look similar in both narcissists and their victims. However, the reasons behind the hoarding can be very different. Whenever a victim of narcissistic abuse exhibits hoarding behaviours, it's not necessarily about the objects themselves, but rather a trauma response to stress, abuse, and neglect. And it can act as a barrier against fear and pain. It's a way of holding on to or maybe trying to regain a sense of control and identity. It can be a way of trying to create a sense of safety in an environment or a relationship that was chaotic and unpredictable, and it tends to come from a survival instinct. Now, when narcissistic people hoard, however, it tends to be more about their ego and their need for control. It comes from their core personality and their belief system. They collect trophies they think will boost their status and their self-worth. They can use their hoard as a means to dominate others. And their pile of treasure is much more important than other people's belongings, even other people's living space. They can collect and hoard information. They collect and hoard other people, just to feel important and in control. They believe they're superior and they're entitled. And they lack empathy for how their mass accumulation of things can affect other people. Now, if you are or you have been in a narcissistic relationship and you exhibit hoarding behaviour, it doesn't necessarily mean you're just messy or selfish. It could mean you're probably doing what you think will give you a sense of safety from terrible emotional and psychological pain. And recognising these differences might help you to understand that healing, even though it can be a slow process, it comes from reclaiming your own identity and your inner space. And it isn't just about filling up space with clutter, but rather by maybe taking up a little more space in the world for yourself. I always say a good place to start is maybe by seeing a counsellor. Now, if there's anything you recognise in this video, anything you may have found helpful in your recovery, if you feel comfortable enough, please share it in the comments section because it might just help someone who's struggling. I'm Darren McGee, and if you found this topic to be interesting, please consider subscribing, and until next time, thanks for watching.